Great Aunt Pat reads Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Chapter 6, Part 3. "Is it true?" he said. "They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment. So it's you, is it?" "Yes," said Harry. He was looking at the other boys. Both of them were thick-set and extremely mean-looking. Standing either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. "Oh, this is Crabbe and this is Goyle," said the pale boy carelessly, noticing where Harry was looking. "And my name's Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." Ron gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "Think my family name's funny, do you? No need to ask who you are. My father told me all the Weasleys have their red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford." He turned back to Harry. "You'll soon find out. Some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to be making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. "I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks," he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink tinge appeared in his pale cheeks. "I'd be careful if I were you, Potter," he said slowly. "Unless you're a bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. You hang around with riffraff like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and it'll rub off on you." Both Harry and Ron stood up. Ron's face was as red as his hair. "Say that again," he said. "Oh, you're going to fight us, are you?" Malfoy sneered. "Unless you get out now," said Harry more bravely than he felt, because Crabbe and Goyle were a lot bigger than he and Ron. "But we don't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've eaten all our food, and you still seem to have some." Goyle reached towards the chocolate frogs next to Ron. Ron leapt forward, but before he so much as touched Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off his finger. Sharp little teeth sunk deep into Goyle's knuckle. Crabbe and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers around and around, howling. And when Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window, all three of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought there were more rats lurking among the sweets, or perhaps they'd heard footsteps because a second later, Hermione Granger had come in. "What's been going on?" she said, looking at the sweets all over the floor and Ron picking up Scabbers by his tail. I think he's been knocked out," Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scabbers. No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep." And so he had. "You've met Malfoy before?" Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. "I've heard of his family," said Ron darkly. "They were some of the first to come to our side after you-know-who disappeared. Said they'd been bewitched. My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side." He turned to Hermione. "Can we help you with something?" "You'd better hurry up and put your robes on. I've just been up the front to ask the driver, and he says we're nearly there. You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we even get there." "Scabbers has been fighting, not us," said Ron, scowling at her. "Would you mind leaving us while we change?" "All right. I only came in here because people outside are behaving very childishly, racing up and down the corridors," said Hermione in a stiff voice. And you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know? Ron glared at her as she left. Harry peered out of the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forests under a deep purple sky. The train did seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes. Ron's was a bit short for him. You could see his trainers underneath them. A voice echoed through the train. We'll be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately. Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way through the door and out onto a tiny, dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years are here. All right there, Harry. Hagrid's big, hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. Come on, follow me. Any more first years? Mind your step now. First years, follow me. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. Y'all get your first sight of Hogwarts in a second, Hagrid called over his shoulder. Just around this bend there. There was a loud whoa. The narrow path had opened suddenly on the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. No more forward to a boat, Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. Everyone in, shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. Right then, forward. And the fleet of little boats moved all off at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer on the cliff on which it stood. Heads down, yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy which hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle until they reached a kind of underground harbor where they clambered out onto the rocks and pebbles. Oi, you there! Is this your toad? Said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. Trevor! Cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up a passage in the rocks after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto a smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around a huge oak front door. Everyone here? You there, still got your toad? Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door.